your emotional sensitivity is not my responsibility. I have shifted the pendulum to the other end in the last 10 years of my life where I have taken like full responsibility. Like how you perceive what I'm about to say, this truth is 100% my responsibility.
As the emotionally sensitive person, I need to make sure that I say this. You also have a massive responsibility of the way that you react to your own sensitivities. Hey everybody, it's Bianca.
Welcome back, Evolvers. It's Emilia.
I had a client the other day who I adore him. I love my male clients. I really do. I really find it amazing when men can really open up and finally get vulnerable and express themselves, and they feel safe enough, and they don't it
Yeah.
helps with their masculinity.
Mm,
So, kind of off topic, but not really. I adore my male clients.
same.
And this one sent me a message the other day, and he said, "How do you tell when a boundary has been crossed or if you've actually been disrespected versus I could be insecure and projecting and blaming someone else or overreacting?"
Ooh,
I
great
heard
question.
that. I read that message and I was like, "Woof. We
Mm,
have to do a podcast episode on that," because I have 10 out of 10 had that thought in my own life, and I
mm,
know so many other people have too. And I think
right.
especially with social media being a thing more, I think we're really able to see how many other people are having thoughts and feelings like this based on the content that I'm seeing. Like,
Mm,
a lot of families, people, whatever, to somebody who's in a healing journey and in a therapy journey
yeah.
will make kind of ignorant comments of like, "Oh, you're in therapy now, so you think you have all of the therapy tools," or like, "Oh, you're
Mm,
using these big words to try to project onto me," and whatever. I've heard everything
mm,
under the sun to try
same.
to for insecure, unhealed people trying to put judgment and criticism on people who are actually in the healing journey. And it
Mhm.
makes people in the healing journey start to be insecure and second guess themselves, which is what's happening with this
Yeah.
client. He and I have really been diving into trauma,
Mhm.
and he's second guessing everything now. He's like, I don't know when I'm right. I don't know when I'm wrong. I don't know if what I'm thinking is accurate or not. Like, it's one of the
Good for
it's one of
him for
the
being vulnerable and sharing that, honestly.
100%, 100%. It's one of the amazing but really scary aspects of therapy and trauma work that
Yeah.
nobody wants to talk about. It's the fact that you kind of are going to feel a little disillusioned in the beginning because you are kind of questioning everything. So, um,
Yeah.
let's start with the question that he asked. How do you know the difference between you genuinely had a boundary crossed versus you have a insecurity or a sensitivity?
Mm,
How would you start by answering that or
right.
step
How I
to
would
answer that?
right. So I would ask for the example and the context because
Mm,
every single person's sensitivities, every single person's insecurities, every single's and thereby their boundaries are constructed based on the former two that I just mentioned, right? So the
mhm.
context really does help me understand the person, and the insecurities help me understand why those boundaries were in place in the first point
Ooh,
and likely infer the type of people that they're surrounding themselves with, whether that be just because they're family or whether that be colleagues, etc. So I would ask for those two things first.
do you think that if a boundary was put up because of an insecurity, that it's invalid?
Not at all.
Meaning, like, if the person is just being insecure,
Mhm.
even if that is the case, or if they're just being sensitive, like, if they are a more sensitive person than other people, does
Yeah.
that even matter? Does that even still invalidate it?
I personally think that someone's sensitivity towards something, like the probability of it coming from a really adverse event in their life, they're likely super sensitive to it because of something that really harmful happened to them. So I don't think it's an excuse for uh like if it's deployed in a sense to avoid growth, I don't think that that's an excuse. However, I do know that there's a time and space for if you're hypersensitive and there is a need underneath why you have that boundary out there. I do think that it's still a valid boundary. Like I don't think that there's a boundary that is fully invalid because of a specific insecurity that's there. I do know that there are people who will take full blown advantage of boundaries and to do so out of reinforcing a narrative about themselves to ultimately avoid and protect themselves from perceived pain.
I am so glad you just said that because there are so many people out there who weaponize the use of boundaries
Oh,
and weaponize other people's sensitivities and whatnot.
yeah.
How do you know the difference?
Oh, man, that's where context and example does. Like, I have a person in mind that is she is hypersensitive. She's literally HSP. So she is on the scale of hypersensitive personality, right? And there's reasons for that. Her adversity that she had experienced not only predisposed her to becoming hypervigilant and thereby hypersensitive, but that is so much of a characteristic trait that she has. And so she has very um I like think about it like a goalpost or something like that. She has them further out than other people who aren't sensitive. And so
Yeah.
like it would take someone, let's say a non-sensitive person, their boundary would be a lot closer to them, for lack of a better word. So it would take the boundary crosser to travel further in order to cross that boundary than the person who has the highly sensitive boundaries that are further out from them, right? Because of however that will impact them. But telling the difference is honestly really difficult. I'm not going to sit here and say it's super easy. The people who weaponize boundaries, though, I would say for me and my skill set, that is more easy to recognize when you have the example and the context and not yeah. I'm gonna keep it there.
I have a couple of things that I wanna say, but I wanna start by saying this. I
Yeah.
am someone who's very sensitive. I don't wanna say that. I
Yeah.
don't wanna call myself out, but, like, it is what it is, and I need to learn how to own it.
Yeah.
I am more sensitive than you are, very
Mhm.
much so, and I was,
Mhm.
I that was my temperament when I was born. Like, for
Right.
whatever reason, I was just born with a more sensitive temperament.
Mhm.
For someone like me, because I know a lot of our listeners are like me where they probably do have higher sensitivity, they're more, um, emotionally sensitive, they're sensitive to the reactions of other people and the things that other people do and say. A
Yeah.
lot of people who are like that feel, oh, how do I say this?
Can I also say, one
Please, while I'm
observation
thinking.
in this that people yeah, while you thinking, a lot of people who are more emotionally sensitive and or who identify as that, as their experience, also have shared that they are also a lot quicker to have meaning be assigned to an emotional experience.
Yeah,
And thus, there's less or the reaction time for a part or a part of them to step in between that meeting and kind of, is this really what's happening? Not to gaslight oneself, but really to look at it more objectively than just strictly emotionally. Like that reaction time doesn't happen as fast. And so, because that meaning is wrapped up and essentially produced so quickly, it further increases that meaning making and thus the emotional experience and higher
yeah.
sensitivity, if you will. So, I do want to add
For
that.
some Yeah, no, I'm glad you did, 'cause it basically you just answered the question that I was gonna ask, but I'm gonna just say it anyways. For
Please.
people who are more highly sensitive, whose responsibility is it
Mm.
to be mindful of those boundaries and sensitivities. I
Yeah.
A lot of sensitive people feel like it's the responsibility of others, and other people feel like you're putting your stuff on me, and I like
Yeah.
kinda get over it. Like, that was my
Right.
experience with my brother. My brother isn't very sensitive,
Yeah.
um, and I am, and so he doesn't really care how he says things, and he'll just say it because he's extremely blunt,
Yeah.
and me and my sister have both been very, like, offended by what he says, and he's like, "Well, you guys just need to not be so sensitive," and I'm like, "Well, you need to, like, watch how you say things.
Mm.
Whose responsibility is it?" I have my opinion, but I'm super curious as to what your thoughts are on this. I think I know, but I'm not gonna assume.
So in real time, I'm reflecting and neuroning, aka reflecting on my life. For I would say the first 20 years of my life, it was so much more that blunt. I don't really I'm less concerned about the impact of me just sharing a truth to someone was, and I'm less sensitive to how that might impact you, the person on the other side emotionally. And my sister and my brother definitely got like brutalized in that. Um, and having the last 10 years of my life have such a different standpoint because of my trauma informed background and my education around emotional intelligence and impact and how that impacts social relational dynamics. I have what in the first 20 years of my life was so much more on the I would say team, it's their responsibility. Like your emotional sensitivity is not my responsibility. I have shifted the pendulum to the other end in the last 10 years of my life where I have taken like full responsibility. Like how you perceive what I'm about to say, this truth is 100% my responsibility. And how you emotionally react to that is 100% my responsibility. So let me try to reverse engineer how I say this truth to someone in order to make sure that they don't have a negative emotional experience. And
That's not
so
acceptable either, though.
it's not, right? That's protective dyadic coping at its finest, which is you preventing the other person from recognizing the truth that exists, which is their emotions, and the impact of that is their responsibility, right? And so I've kind of been able to experience both sides. Now I do feel as though in this year, the last year in particular, I've had that dance between pendulum A that I mentioned, which was the first 20 years of my life, to pendulum B, which was the last 10 or last 9 years, for lack of better words. And so now being more at 5, I love the fact that you brought this up because when it comes to core beliefs around our, in general, more cultural belief around other people's emotions are my responsibility and how that's been so wildly conditioned to so many people. There's a shred of truth in that only if you do want to continue the relationship. And hear me out. We being mindful of our impact on others, there is a part that we play in that. And to be naive to that is arrogant. And that's how the first 20 years of my life was. We have so much influence and impact on other people than we might feel capable of accepting, because that is a heavy weight and it can be seen as a burden very easily if you don't know the value of emotions.
Remind me again what the technical term of that is. It's not mirror neuroning. I mentioned it in one of the other episodes. Emotional attunement. I just answered my own question.
Ah, yeah, attunement. Mhm.
Emotional attunement is a real thing. Anyone who says that the emotions of other people aren't going to impact you is wrong because it
It's
does.
literally scientifically inaccurate.
And as the emotionally sensitive person, I need to make sure that I say this. You also have a massive responsibility of the way that you react to your own sensitivities.
And the meaning that you give that
100%.
perception. Yeah.
100%.
Thank you for
I
saying that.
am sensitive. I am.
Mhm.
It's true. And I'm
It's a
learning
beautiful
how to
thing.
not be sensitive. Learning how to, again, I'm still learning this. I'm learning how, what my interpretation sensations are and how my body automatically reacts without even a thought going through because I've been conditioned to physiologically respond to challenges or
Yeah.
confrontation or conflict in a very specific way.
Mm.
When it comes to when it comes to all of this, it's the responsibility of both people, but as you being the person, you got to protect your energy. So you have to ensure that you're
Mm.
understanding the thoughts, feelings, and interpretations that you're having from things. You also need to be able to ask for what you need, and very
Mm.
sensitive people don't know how to do that. I did not know how to do that for years. I
Yeah.
didn't know how to ask for what I needed. I didn't know how to ask for what I wanted. I didn't feel safe or comfortable expressing my thoughts and feelings. And so people just said and did whatever they wanted. And
Yeah.
because I didn't know how to do any of this stuff, I would have these emotional outbursts that were either internalized, meaning I would just shame and blame and criticize, or in my earlier years, they were externalizing to where I would get angry and I would yell and I'd be like, "You can't talk to me like that," and whatever. And we've all been there. We've all had all of them. So
Mhm.
as the sensitive person, you got to be able to do both. And here's the other thing, you don't have to keep the relationship. This is where boundaries really do come into play. Even if you are sensitive, you're allowed to
Mhm.
set boundaries because you learning what your thoughts and feelings are will help you to understand, am I actually just being really sensitive and I'm not ready to hear this feedback?
Yeah.
Because that's
Yeah.
where reactive boundaries come from. If I say something to Emilia because it's the truth and she doesn't like it and she
Mhm.
doesn't want to hear it, even if I could say it in the nicest, most nonviolent communication way possible, if she's not ready to hear it, she might reactively go, "Nope, that's a boundary. I'm not talking about that." That's not a
Yeah.
real boundary. It's called avoidance.
Yeah, that's called a self-protective mechanism of avoidance.
Exactly. So
Um,
when you're the highly sensitive person, you need to be able to understand, am I being sensitive here? Like, is this me feeling like I'm actually at harm and this really isn't okay and I'm actually not comfortable with this because I know
mhm.
what I want and I know what I don't want and I know who I am and I know my likes and my values and all of that?
Yeah.
Or is this because I'm just not actually ready to hear this thing because I don't want to be called out? And the more you become aware of yourself and the more that you're able to navigate these things, the better you'll be at being able to recognize the difference.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also want to pay tribute to a lot of people who, when they do have something, let's say, a highly sensitive person or someone who identifies that, or you're having a highly sensitive moment, right? Let's say you didn't realize it, but you experienced trauma at the hands of an older woman that has a specific body type. You might come into contact with someone, let's say at work, who they're trying to push to do something in a specific deadline or a specific time, and all of a sudden you have a emotional reaction and you feel as though a boundary just got crossed, and it's confusing, it's disorienting, and you notice yourself wanting to set a reactive boundary. You have every right to go and explore was what was the reason why you wanted to put that in place in the first place, because likely there's something underneath that maybe just got triggered. And so reactive boundaries can be in place for short-term avoidance, but it's what we're saying in this is that if your long-term avoidance and that reactive boundary is set there and then just, you never return back to that, or you never explore why that reaction was there in the first place, like that is full blown going to have an implication in your life. If you're someone who sets a reactive boundary and says something along the lines of like, your colleague's trying to get after this deadline and wants to like meet up for, at night and go over this project and whatever, and you notice like your physiological sensation, your body's like freaking out inside, like you can say, honestly, I feel a little disoriented right now. I feel like a boundary just got crossed, and like nothing against you, but I do want to explore it. And can we talk later? Right? Like those intermediary reactive boundaries can be
Mm.
a self-protective mechanism in a really healthy way. However, if that's set and forgotten, that is where not only might a boundary have gotten crossed, but then you took that I'm super sensitive to another level to where this boundary like should forever be there. And that I always tell my clients that when you set a boundary, it's not just to protect something, like you had mentioned, protect your energy. And I'm so for that. But also, another reframe is to honor the energies that you want to be in and that you want
Thank
to
you.
exist within. And sometimes there's temporary, right? That's why there's different types of boundaries, like porous, rigid, or healthy boundaries. That is so, again, person contingent, like example contingent, context contingent. And that is why so many people, I personally believe, that struggle when it comes to setting boundaries and honoring them, because there's not a lot of education around boundaries. Well, there is now more than ever. But when we
Yeah.
talk about boundaries, we ask other people what their boundaries are, or we observe what other people's boundaries are, and then we compare it to ours. And it might not look or feel the same on us if we were to just all of a sudden pop out of that relationship, rather than just in the interim set a semi-porous and or increasing rigid boundary that, has a timeline on it, or that has a contingent. As I understand myself at a deeper level, I am okay at making this more of a porous boundary, or I feel comfortable making more of a rigid boundary here. And here's why, right? Really self exploration around why this is here in the first place.
This was really good. We're going to be doing a few live events talking about different things like this. So, the Out of the Mud event that we host on the last Wednesday of every single month, we did the lineup for 2025, and there's going to be a few different topics surrounding this. So, if this is something that you're interested in, if this is something that you're interested in um, diving into, then make sure you're subscribed to the podcast. Make sure you're subscribed on all of the different platforms so that um, you can hear more about this and so that you can make sure that you're getting that information when you need it.
Mm. Love that. Thank you.
What is your episode suggestion?
My episode suggestion is 285, which is a Motivation Monday episode. And it's digging into all things three, well, not all things, just three surefire ways to feel more confident, but it does connect to all things. B?
345, how to not be guilt tripped. All right, everybody.
Beautiful.
Thank you for joining us. This was spicy spice, and I love it.
Thank
We will
you.
see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.